The room buzzed with quiet murmurs, but the tension was palpable. Every eye was on him as he rose from his seat, a slender figure hunched slightly over a worn leather notebook. The words had barely left his lips. Pi is infinite. A ripple of laughter swept across the lecture hall, sharp and mocking. Professor Thorne, a man whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by his biting arrogance, arched a brow and let a slow, measured laugh fill the room. "Infinite?" he said, his voice dripping with incredulity. "Do you mean to insult the centuries of mathematicians who have spent their lives exploring this number? Or are you merely entertaining delusions of grandeur?" The student, Adrian Calloway, met the professor's gaze without flinching, though his pulse pounded in his ears. 10 years. 10 years of relentless calculations, sleepless nights, and endless frustration, all boiled down to this single declaration, and the world around him reduced it to mockery. He felt a familiar surge of both defiance and weariness. Adrian had chosen this lecture hall deliberately, knowing the professor's reputation for dismissing even the most promising minds. He wanted to see if the truth, however inconvenient, could pierce through arrogance. Professor Thorne strode toward the podium, his polished shoes tapping with rhythmic precision. "Do you understand what you're claiming, Mr. Calloway? Infinite, that the digits of pi never repeat, never end." He leaned closer, his cold eyes drilling into Adrian. "Or are you simply parroting what you read in some popular science journal, hoping for a moment of attention?" Adrian's hand tightened around the notebook, its edges frayed from years of obsessive scribbling. He knew the professor did not merely doubt. He belittled, challenged, sought to crush confidence under the weight of reputation and authority. Adrian took a slow breath and opened the notebook to a page thick with annotations, formulas, and diagrams. He had learned long ago that proving something beyond comprehension required not just intellect but patience, strategy, and timing. "I don't mean attention," he said evenly. "I mean exactly what I said. Pi is infinite, and I have spent a decade working toward a method to quantify its properties in a way that has never been attempted before." A murmur of disbelief rolled through the room. Students shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, curiosity mingling with skepticism. The professor straightened, clearly taken aback by the calm certainty in Adrian's voice. He studied the young man, his mind racing through the possibilities of error, oversight, or even fraud. 10 years, he said slowly, almost to himself. "And you dare stand here with such audacity?" He gestured to the blackboard behind him. "Then show us. Demonstrate this theory. Convince me that you are not merely entertaining fantasy with complex symbols." Adrian stepped forward, placing the notebook carefully on the desk. Each page was meticulously organized, a testament to his relentless pursuit. "It begins with reinterpreting the sequence of pi through a multidimensional framework," he explained, tracing the first diagram with a finger. "Traditional methods treat pi as a static series, but if we consider it as a dynamic function within modular systems, we begin to see patterns not previously accessible. These patterns reveal not a limit, but a structure that extends indefinitely." A low murmur spread among the students. Even the most distracted eyes could not avoid the intricate diagrams and numbers that sprawled across the pages. Professor Thorne leaned over, squinting at the notes, trying to detect a flaw, a hidden assumption, something to dismiss. "And you are certain of this?" he asked, his tone still tinged with skepticism, though now laced with the faintest curiosity. "You have traversed this path for 10 years and remain convinced?" Adrian nodded. "I am. Every calculation, every proof, every verification points in the same direction. I am not claiming to have solved pi entirely, but I have uncovered a method that demonstrates its infinity in a concrete, reproducible way." The lecture hall was silent now, except for the faint scratching of pens on paper. Some students furiously copied notes, unable to resist the unfolding revelation. Others simply stared, caught between awe and disbelief. The professor stepped back, his mind a storm of pride, doubt, and irritation. He had dedicated decades to this field, yet here was a student, an unknown, almost invisible in academic circles, presenting something that, if true, could challenge fundamental assumptions. For Adrian, the room's shift in atmosphere was almost imperceptible. He had anticipated ridicule, doubt, and condescension, but he had also expected that truth, however hidden, had a way of making itself known. He flipped the page, revealing a matrix of numbers, graphs, and annotations detailing the application of his method across increasing decimal expansions. "Observe," he said softly, "how the sequence grows without repetition, and how modular convergence never produces a terminating or cyclical pattern. Each iteration aligns with the previous, yet extends indefinitely. It is a living proof of infinity." Professor Thorne's eyes narrowed, scanning the calculations with a precision born of years of mastery. The silence stretched, charged with tension, until he finally spoke, voice quieter than before, almost a murmur. "This is unprecedented. It aligns with historical conjectures yet pushes beyond anything published. And you, a student, have done this alone." Adrian's lips pressed into a tight line. "Not entirely alone," he admitted, "but I have been the sole orchestrator of this method, the one to guide its formulation and execution." The professor withdrew, leaning back, his earlier mockery replaced by a storm of conflicted admiration and disbelief. Students glanced at one another, realizing that what began as a lecture in ridicule had transformed into a historical moment. Adrian closed the notebook gently, as if aware that every second counted in this fragile balance between recognition and denial. The room held its breath, the air thick with possibility and tension, the first seeds of a revolution in mathematics quietly planted in the hands of a young man who had dared to say the unspeakable. Pi is infinite. Professor Thorne's lips pressed into a thin line as he stared at the notebook, the intricate web of numbers and formulas sprawled across its pages. A decade of experience, a lifetime of accolades, and yet here was a student, seemingly ordinary, presenting something that could rival any theorem he had ever encountered. He took a slow breath, attempting to regain composure, but the words felt heavier in his mouth. "Explain your methodology step by step," he said finally, each syllable deliberate. "Do not gloss over details. I want the logic, not conjecture, not intuition. Logic." Adrian nodded, as though this moment had been the culmination of years of preparation. He moved to the blackboard, chalk in hand, though his eyes remained fixed on the equations in the notebook. "We begin by reframing pi not as a static series, but as a dynamic function across modular spaces," he began, voice steady. "The traditional approach calculates decimal expansions sequentially, assuming each digit is independent, but through modular interdependence, we uncover relational sequences. These sequences reveal structural repetition at the micro level, yet the macro expansion demonstrates continuous divergence, proof of non-termination." The students leaned in, some scrambling to copy the symbols, others simply watching, mesmerized. The professor remained silent, his mind racing. Years of study and authority had trained him to detect errors, false assumptions, oversights. He scanned the first few pages, and the mathematics was flawless. Not just correct, but elegant. The kind of elegance that revealed deep understanding and intuition, beyond simple computation. A spark of both admiration and disbelief flickered in Thorne's eyes. "Continue," he said finally, his voice taut with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. "Show me how your approach extends beyond traditional limits." Adrian's hand moved with precision, transferring the key elements from notebook to board. Graphs intersected with matrices, modular equations branching into fractal representations. Each iteration aligns with the previous, but diverges along higher-order modular planes, he explained. "Observe the pattern. At every calculated stage, pi maintains divergence, yet remains internally consistent. There is no terminal point, no cyclical repetition. Infinity is not abstract here, it is demonstrated within the framework." A hush fell over the hall. Some students whispered to themselves, pointing at complex symbols they could barely comprehend but sensed the significance of. Others simply stared at Adrian, realizing that a student, long dismissed as average, had just challenged centuries of mathematical orthodoxy. The tension between Professor Thorne and Adrian was now palpable, almost physical. Authority versus innovation, tradition versus persistence. Thorne circled the desk slowly, his eyes scanning each line, each calculation, attempting to pierce through layers of meticulous work. "You've calculated?" he asked, his tone cautious, almost hesitant. "You claim to have computed sequences large enough to validate this method?" Adrian nodded, the faintest trace of weariness flickering across his face. "Not merely large, but systematically extended to reveal patterns across multiple orders of magnitude. each calculation verified independently. Each verified set supports the same conclusion. Pi extends infinitely with measurable structure. The professor's hand flexed on the edge of the desk, a subtle gesture betraying the storm behind his composed exterior. "And you have done this entirely yourself?" he asked again, voice softer now, almost incredulous. Adrian hesitated only briefly. "I've done this primarily myself. Collaborators offered minor insights, but I orchestrated the method, guided the computation, and verified the results. I bear full responsibility for the logic and outcome." Thorne turned toward the students, his gaze sharp, seeking reaction, perhaps affirmation or resistance. The murmurs had ceased. The hall hung on the edge of disbelief and awe. "This, if true, challenges what we've considered foundational for centuries," he said, almost to himself. "But extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof." His eyes snapped back to Adrian. "I will not allow authority to dictate reason, but neither will I accept unverified novelty. Prove it." Adrian closed the notebook briefly, locking eyes with the professor. "I have provided a reproducible methodology," he said calmly. "Anyone following these steps, using these parameters, will reach the same conclusion. The framework is sound. The calculations are precise. The sequence of pi, analyzed through modular interdependence and fractal expansion, reveals the infinity I speak of. You can replicate it if you wish, but I assure you, the proof is already embedded within these pages." The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Students felt it too, the weight of witnessing a potential revolution in mathematics unfold in real time. Professor Thorne's pride and skepticism warred visibly across his face. The internal debate mirrored in the sudden quiet of the hall. He had always believed that authority, intellect, and experience were enough to define truth. But here was Adrian, 10 years of relentless work, standing unflinchingly in the face of centuries of tradition. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Thorne stepped back, gaze lingering on the notebook. He exhaled, almost imperceptibly, then spoke, his tone measured but tinged with reluctant admiration. "If your calculations hold, and if your framework is replicable," his words trailed as he shook his head slightly, "then you may have done what no one else dared attempt in centuries. But the burden of proof rests with you. The next stage is validation, peer review, replication, scrutiny from every corner of the field. Only then can history consider this a breakthrough." Adrian's fingers brushed the edge of the notebook, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. He had anticipated this. The first confrontation had passed. The gauntlet was thrown. The battle between ridicule and recognition, skepticism and evidence, had only just begun. And as the students scribbled furiously, aware that they had witnessed the first chapter of something monumental, Adrian knew that the long decade of solitude and obsession had led to this singular moment. The truth could no longer be denied, even by the most formidable authority in the room. The following week, the university hall was unusually packed. Word had spread like wildfire. Adrian had challenged one of the most established authorities in mathematics, and his findings suggested something that could reshape centuries of understanding. Professors, graduate students, visiting scholars, and even reporters had gathered, drawn by whispers of a bold student defying orthodoxy. Adrian sat quietly at the front, notebook open, his fingers tapping lightly against the leather cover, eyes scanning the room that seemed to shrink with expectation. Professor Thorne arrived last, entering with measured steps, his coat brushing against the floor. The room hushed instantly. Authority, prestige, and decades of acclaim weighed heavily in his presence. But the tension had shifted. No longer was he the unquestioned arbiter. Curiosity and skepticism now mingled in equal measure with his pride. He took the lectern, glanced at the students, then finally met Adrian's gaze. "We convene to examine a claim that pi, the constant we've revered, is infinite in a demonstrable manner," he began, voice steady but wary. "Mr. Adrian claims to have evidence supported by 10 years of computation. It is our duty to scrutinize, question, and, if true, acknowledge. Let us proceed with rigor." Adrian rose slowly, the room's weight pressing on his shoulders yet failing to sway his confidence. "I appreciate your time and attention," he began. "I understand the gravity of what I claim. Infinity is not a trivial concept, and suggesting its tangible proof invites skepticism. I have prepared a series of demonstrations, each replicable and verifiable, to show the non-terminating nature of pi within a computational framework. He moved to the blackboard, writing quickly, confidently, the numbers forming sequences that seemed almost alive. Students and professors leaned in, eyes darting between the board and the notebook he held. Each equation built upon the previous, the logic cascading seamlessly, and yet beneath it all, a subtle elegance hinted at the depth of thought and years of iterative exploration. A visiting mathematician, Dr. Leclerc, raised his hand. "Mr. Adrian, this approach is unconventional. Have you considered the implications of rounding errors and computational limitations? How do you account for accumulated inaccuracies across multiple iterations?" Adrian nodded without hesitation. "That is an essential concern. My method employs adaptive precision management, which recalibrates sequences dynamically. Errors are bounded, and divergence patterns remain intact across multiple recalibrations. The sequences converge within local structures yet diverge in macro patterns, ensuring that the infinite progression is not an artifact of calculation, but a property of pi itself." Murmurs spread across the audience. Whispers of awe, disbelief, and incredulity blended into a single hum of tension. Even Professor Thorne's gaze, sharp and analytical, softened for the briefest instant, betraying admiration. Yet he masked it quickly. "You must provide peer verification. I will not accept a claim based solely on your personal calculations." Adrian's hand rested on the notebook, the faint smile of quiet certainty barely perceptible. "I anticipated that," he replied calmly. "I have prepared replication protocols. Any team with access to standard computational resources can follow these instructions and verify the sequences independently. I welcome scrutiny, not as a challenge, but as an affirmation of truth." A graduate student, eyes wide with a mix of excitement and fear, whispered to a neighbor, "If this is correct, it changes everything." "Indeed," came a voice from the back of the hall. Dr. Raymond, a senior scholar of theoretical mathematics, stepped forward. "But extraordinary claims require not just rigor but reproducibility at scale. Calculations at this magnitude are immense. Have you tested this framework across varying computational models?" Adrian flipped open a new section of the notebook, revealing charts and graphs meticulously annotated. "I have tested across multiple platforms, from traditional CPUs to distributed cloud systems. Each result aligns consistently. There are minor deviations due to environmental limitations, but the overarching patterns, non-terminating, infinitely expanding, persist. This is not conjecture. It is verifiable structure." Professor Thorne's jaw tightened. He had been a guardian of tradition, a sentinel against overreach. Yet the evidence was mounting, structured, elegant, undeniable in its logic. He stepped forward, voice measured but firm. "Even if your calculations are correct, Mr. Adrian, you must understand the responsibility this claim carries. History will scrutinize, challenge, and attempt to dismantle it. Will you stand by your work under such pressure?" Adrian's eyes met Thorne's, unwavering. "I have stood for 10 years. Every failure, every setback, every moment of doubt only strengthened my understanding. I am prepared for scrutiny, prepared for challenge, and prepared for the truth to emerge, regardless of recognition or ridicule." The room remained silent for a heartbeat, the weight of 10 years and centuries of mathematics pressing down. Then, slowly, Professor Thorne exhaled. "Very well," he said. "We will proceed with verification. Let this be an exercise not of ego, but of reason. The world may not be ready for what you claim, Mr. Adrian, but we shall see if it can withstand examination." Adrian returned to his seat, fingers resting lightly on the notebook. A faint smile crossed his lips, almost imperceptible to those around him, but deep with satisfaction. The first formal challenge had been issued, and he was ready. The decade of obsession, calculation, and solitude had led to this room, these faces, and this moment, where authority, skepticism, and innovation collided, setting the stage for a revelation that could not be ignored. The verification began immediately. Adrian handed over his meticulously detailed protocols to a team of graduate students and visiting mathematicians, each step precisely annotated. The lecture hall had transformed into a temporary laboratory. Monitors hummed, processors whirred, and equations scrolled endlessly across screens. Every calculation was scrutinized, every algorithm tested against multiple computational frameworks. At first, doubts persisted. Minor deviations appeared, rounding errors and environmental constraints threatened to obscure patterns, and murmurs of skepticism rose. Some faculty whispered that Adrian had misinterpreted infinite sequences, that the human mind could not hope to grasp such vastness. Yet Adrian remained calm, walking between clusters of students, explaining subtle nuances, and highlighting adjustments that corrected anomalies, without affecting the overall sequence. Hours passed. The initial doubt gave way to astonishment. As results stabilized, sequences aligned with Adrian's predictions. Numbers stretched endlessly across the monitors, patterns emerging and diverging in ways that had never been visualized before. The hall vibrated with tension, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and awe. It was as if centuries of mathematical certainty were unraveling in real time. Dr. Leclerc, who had earlier challenged Adrian's methodology, adjusted his glasses and whispered to a colleague, "It's remarkably consistent. I've seen anomalies before, but this appears deliberate, methodical. I can't dismiss it." A journalist present, notebook open and pen poised, scribbled furiously. "If verified, this will be historic," she murmured, barely able to conceal excitement. Outside, rumors of the claim had already begun circulating. Emails, social media, and forums buzzed with debates, arguments, and speculation. The narrative of a student defying a prestigious professor to prove pi infinite was irresistible, a story blending intellect, obsession, and the audacity of youth. Back inside the hall, Professor Thorne paced, hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of stoic composure. Yet beneath it, conflict roiled. Years of authority, accolades, and published works weighed against the undeniable clarity of Adrian's sequences. He had ridiculed the student weeks ago, yet now the evidence demanded acknowledgement. Thorne knew that conceding, even partially, could undermine decades of prestige, yet ignoring it risked intellectual dishonesty. "Adrian," Thorne said finally, voice carefully measured, "the replication is promising, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary confirmation. Have you accounted for potential hidden variables, systemic biases, or computational artifacts that could produce false positives?" Adrian met his gaze steadily. "I anticipated every reasonable objection. I've tested across platforms, recalibrated for systemic errors, and included redundancy checks. What remains is not an artifact but an emergent property. Pi's infinite nature within the computational and theoretical frameworks is evident. It is reproducible, verifiable, and consistent." A visiting scholar, Professor Nakamura, interjected. "But consider the philosophical implications. To assert a tangible proof of infinity challenges the foundations of mathematics itself. How do we reconcile centuries of accepted limitations with your findings?" Adrian's expression did not waver. "Mathematics is not static, it is a living discipline. Proof does not negate tradition but extends understanding. Infinity has been conceptually accepted, but proving it in a computationally tangible way transforms it from abstraction to demonstrable reality." By evening, news had spread beyond the campus. Students debated in dormitories, online communities erupted with discussion threads, and a live stream of the verification process attracted thousands. The world was watching as a quiet, almost reclusive student challenged the very foundation of mathematical certainty. Amid the excitement, dissent grew. Some professors accused Adrian of hubris, claiming that a decade of obsession could cloud judgment. Some mathematicians warned against public dissemination until peer review was complete. Yet others championed him as a revolutionary thinker, the embodiment of intellectual courage. Social media exploded with hashtags, memes, and debates, dividing enthusiasts and skeptics alike. In the midst of chaos, Adrian remained grounded. He documented every verification attempt, every adjustment, and every anomaly. He understood that truth, once revealed, demanded patience, precision, and transparency. Yet he also sensed that the stakes were growing. He was no longer just a student. He had become a symbol of audacity, intellect, and the potential of persistent inquiry. Professor Thorne, sitting silently at the back, finally spoke in a low, controlled voice. "Adrian, if your sequences hold under full peer scrutiny, you will have accomplished something remarkable. Perhaps something unprecedented. But you must be prepared. Recognition, skepticism, and controversy will come in equal measure." Adrian nodded. "I am prepared. I have spent 10 years not for recognition, but for truth." Let history judge the results, not ambition. As the night deepened, screens glowed across the hall, sequences cascading endlessly, patterns expanding infinitely. The hum of computers was the only sound. Outside, the campus was silent, yet a storm of ideas, debates, and anticipation raged quietly but unmistakably. The first formal replication attempt was complete, and the world had begun to glimpse the magnitude of what Adrian had achieved. The tension between tradition and innovation, authority and audacity, certainty and infinite possibility, had reached its peak, and it would not abate. By dawn, the campus was no longer a secluded hub of mathematics. It had become a nexus of global attention. News outlets from New York to Tokyo carried the headline, "Student claims proof of pi's infinity." Adrian arrived early, carrying the same leather-bound notebook he had used for years, its pages brimming with dense sequences, annotations, and algorithmic commentary. He barely noticed the reporters hovering in the courtyard, their cameras and microphones pointing toward him like an accusing jury. Professor Thorne, reluctantly presiding, called for an emergency departmental meeting. Faculty members, some loyal and some openly skeptical, gathered around the polished oak table. Each brought a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Among them was Dr. Leclerc, whose earlier doubts had shifted into cautious respect, and Professor Nakamura, whose philosophical concerns had grown urgent overnight. "Let's begin," Thorne said, voice steady but undercut with tension. "We have a claim that challenges fundamental assumptions. Adrian, the sequences have been replicated within our controlled environment, but the broader scrutiny will be merciless. Are you prepared?" Adrian nodded, voice calm. "I anticipated this. Every variable accounted for, every computational bias eliminated. The proof is intact." Before the meeting could continue, the first major challenge arrived, not from skeptics within the university, but from an external consortium. A team of mathematicians from the International Institute of Advanced Mathematics, IIAM, had flown in, armed with cutting-edge supercomputers and independent verification protocols. They requested full access to Adrian's sequences, demanding transparency and immediate collaboration. Thorne hesitated, aware that granting access could either solidify Adrian's claim or dismantle it completely. After a tense moment, he gestured toward Adrian. "The decision is yours." Adrian didn't falter. "I welcome scrutiny. Truth cannot hide from investigation." Within hours, the IAM team began processing the sequences. Their supercomputers, normally reserved for modeling black holes and complex quantum systems, whirred and hummed. The sequences stretched across multiple monitors, scrolling endlessly, each digit checked against theoretical models, stochastic simulations, and probabilistic analyses. Outside, journalists crowded the lawns, live-streaming every update, narrating the drama as if it were a sports championship rather than a mathematical experiment. Adrian walked among the monitors, observing anomalies with the precision of a surgeon. When minor inconsistencies emerged due to computational overflow, he immediately adjusted his code, explaining the nuances to the visiting mathematicians. "These are not errors in the proof," he said, voice steady. "They are artifacts of system limitations. The underlying sequence remains valid." Hours turned into an entire day. Faculty members debated, whispered, and consulted, their faces etched with disbelief and awe. Thorne, pacing in the corner, muttered repeatedly, "A decade, 10 years of obsession, to defy centuries of certainty." He couldn't shake the growing awareness that authority alone could not negate evidence. Meanwhile, global attention intensified. Social media exploded with theories, interviews, and memes portraying Adrian as a modern-day Pythagoras, the young genius who dared to challenge entrenched knowledge. Mathematicians around the world logged in to streaming sessions, analyzing snippets of Adrian's sequences. Some were inspired, calling for public lectures. Others were outraged, accusing the student of recklessness. Yet all agreed, something unprecedented was unfolding. By late evening, the IAM team paused. Their chief analyst, Dr. Valentina Moro, adjusted her glasses and turned to Thorne. "The sequences are consistent, reproducible, and align perfectly with Adrian's predictions. Within computational constraints, this is undeniable. The claim is extraordinary, yet I cannot find a fault." A ripple of astonishment passed through the room. Even Thorne, usually implacable, felt his jaw tighten. Adrian, standing quietly at the side, allowed a brief smile. He had anticipated this recognition, but he had also prepared for the inevitable backlash. And backlash was already forming. One of the visiting IIM mathematicians, Professor Rami Altarazzi, raised a challenging question. The theoretical implications are enormous. If pi can be demonstrated to infinity computationally, what does this mean for numerical methods, cryptography, and applied mathematics? Could errors in the sequence, if misinterpreted, have real-world consequences? Adrian responded without hesitation. All algorithms and methods are documented, transparent, and reproducible. The sequences are tools, not weapons. Misuse stems from misunderstanding, not proof. Yet the question lingered, unsettling some of the faculty. Adrian's work was no longer a private triumph. It had become a catalyst for broader discussions about the ethics, risks, and responsibilities of knowledge. The implications were philosophical, technical, and societal. Night fell over the campus, but the hall remained alive with activity. Sequences streamed endlessly across monitors, discussions continued in hushed tones, and the tension between authority and innovation crackled like electricity. Adrian, exhausted but focused, continued observing, annotating, and explaining. He knew that the storm had only just begun. Once the world fully grasped his work, acclaim, skepticism, and controversy would collide in unpredictable ways. By midnight, the first official validation report circulated. Adrian's sequences passed every test. For the first time, a proof, derived from a student's relentless obsession, was recognized as credible by an external authority. Yet even as congratulations circulated, whispers of challenge and debate began. In the realm of mathematics, recognition came hand in hand with scrutiny, and Adrian was now at the epicenter of both. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the auditorium, illuminating rows of mathematicians, journalists, and students who had gathered for the first public discussion of Adrian's work. The tension was palpable. At the podium, Professor Thorne introduced the event with a tone that balanced formality and unease. Today, we convene to examine an unprecedented claim. The sequences presented by Adrian have been validated under controlled conditions, but their implications will reverberate beyond this room. I urge caution, rigor, and respect. Before Adrian could speak, a sharp voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Professor Victor Derling, a veteran mathematician with decades of authority and a reputation for ruthless criticism, leaned forward. His piercing eyes scanned Adrian's notebook. You claim to have demonstrated that pi is infinite in a tangible, reproducible way, he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. Yet, centuries of mathematical research define pi as an irrational number, a limit approached but never fully captured. You have dared to simplify what has eluded geniuses for centuries. Adrian did not flinch. He opened his notebook, carefully aligning the pages on the lectern. Professor Derling, I am aware of the established definitions. My work does not contradict them. It provides a methodical demonstration of infinite progression, revealing patterns previously inaccessible through conventional computation. Derling scoffed audibly. A student, after 10 years, believes he has outpaced the foundations of mathematics. Do you understand the audacity of this claim? The audience held its collective breath. Adrian's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the storm brewing on the other side of the lectern. I understand completely, Adrian replied, and I welcome scrutiny. My sequences have been tested and retested. The proof stands, but its strength lies in replication, not assertion. I am not asking for belief, I am presenting evidence. Dr. Valentina Moro from the IAM intervened. The sequences have been verified by independent computation. Professor Derling, the concern is not whether the work aligns with tradition, but whether it is reproducible. So far, it is. Derling's eyes narrowed, scanning the audience as though searching for allies. Reproducible within certain limits does not equate to absolute proof. Your work, young man, is fascinating, but it borders on hubris. Infinity cannot be solved in a finite time frame. To claim otherwise is to mislead. Adrian's hand traced one of the sequences, a delicate line of numbers spiraling into abstraction. Infinity as a concept is indeed boundless. My work does not claim to contain it entirely, but to demonstrate the inevitability of its extension. The proof is procedural, it grows without end, just as pi itself does. That is the nature of infinity. It cannot be captured fully, only expressed through progression. The debate ignited a firestorm within the room. Younger mathematicians murmured in excitement. Journalists scribbled notes furiously. Some faculty exchanged worried glances. Durling, sensing the fissures forming among skeptics, pressed further. Even if your sequences are accurate, the method raises questions. Algorithmic extrapolation is not proof. You are presenting computation as demonstration, yet proof requires deductive certainty. Can you address this? Adrian's voice rose slightly, clear and unwavering. Proof has many forms. Deductive reasoning is one. Procedural demonstration is another. Mathematics is not static, it evolves. By using computation to illustrate infinite progression, I am extending the language of proof, not violating it. The sequences are exact, repeatable, and verifiable. They provide insight, not just numbers. The room fell into silence, the weight of his words settling over the assembly. A young professor in the back, Dr. Catarina Silva, whispered to a colleague, "He's redefining boundaries without arrogance." That's rare. Durling, refusing to yield, tapped his notes aggressively. Redefinition without peer review is dangerous. How do you intend to withstand global scrutiny? This claim will attract intense criticism from mathematicians, philosophers, and the scientific community at large. Have you prepared for that? Adrian's expression hardened slightly. I expected it. Preparation is why I documented every step, every variable, every sequence for replication. Criticism is a tool, it identifies weakness. I welcome it. I am not defending ego, I am defending truth. The conversation shifted as journalists began asking questions about the real-world implications of Adrian's work. One reporter asked about cryptography, another about quantum computing. Adrian explained how the demonstration of infinite sequences could inform algorithmic design, pattern recognition, and numerical modeling without disrupting existing mathematical frameworks. By noon, the auditorium had become a forum for intellectual crossfire. Durling continued to challenge, Adrian calmly responded, and the younger mathematicians began to interject, offering perspectives that ranged from cautious optimism to reverent awe. The narrative had shifted. What began as a claim now commanded philosophical and computational attention. Outside, live streams carried the debate to millions. Social media erupted with hashtags. Hashtag #PyChallenge, hashtag Infinite Proof, hashtag Adrian versus Durling. The world watched a student and a seasoned authority clash, not over fame, but over the fundamental nature of knowledge. And in the midst of it, Adrian maintained a quiet focus, aware that each challenge sharpened the proof's credibility. This confrontation was not an obstacle, it was the crucible. The first public attack, though fierce, had only illuminated the depth and precision of his work. Adrian's phone buzzed incessantly as he stepped out of the auditorium, the echoes of Durling's voice still lingering in his mind. Messages from colleagues, news agencies, and mathematicians flooded in. Some were laudatory, praising the audacity and precision of his work. Others were accusatory, questioning the legitimacy of a student who dared challenge centuries of orthodoxy. He had anticipated scrutiny, yet the sheer magnitude of the global attention caught him off guard. He found himself in a quiet corridor, papers clutched in one hand, a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. Dr. Morrow caught up to him, her expression both anxious and excited. Adrian, you've ignited something massive. The sequences alone were enough to draw attention, but the confrontation with Durling, it's viral. Conferences, journals, even governmental agencies, they want to see your methodology verified immediately. Adrian exhaled slowly. I expected scrutiny. I didn't expect a media storm. 10 years of work, and suddenly, the world is watching a single proof as if it were a prophecy. Morrow smiled faintly. A prophecy? Perhaps. Or maybe it's a mirror, reflecting how the world reacts to new ideas. It's always easier to dismiss than to understand. Before Adrian could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar number with an international code. He answered. A crisp, authoritative voice came through. Mr. Adrian Calder. This is Dr. Ishan Verma, Director of the International Mathematics Advisory Council. Your sequences have reached us. We require immediate verification and a full explanation of your methods. Be advised, the Council considers the implications profound. Adrian's pulse quickened. I will provide everything necessary, Dr. Verma. The documentation is complete, and the procedures are fully reproducible. Good, Verma replied, but be warned. The scrutiny will be unrelenting. Your work will be examined not only for accuracy, but for its implications on computational theory, cryptography, and potentially even artificial intelligence. Proceed carefully. As he hung up, Adrian realized that the personal journey of a decade had transformed overnight into a global responsibility. Every calculation, every annotation he had made would be dissected, debated, and possibly weaponized by critics and advocates alike. The stakes were no longer academic, they were public, strategic, and high-profile. He returned to the auditorium, where a crowd had gathered for a spontaneous follow-up discussion. Durling was surrounded by journalists, continuing his critique with the same ferocity as before. Adrian approached, notebook in hand, and addressed the room. The sequences are consistent, repeatable, and verifiable. I am open to collaboration, not conflict. Let us engage with the evidence rather than conjecture. Durling fixed him with a steely gaze. Collaboration, Mr. Calder, assumes a foundation of trust. How do we trust that a student, untested in formal research protocols, can bear the responsibility of a claim that challenges centuries of mathematical doctrine? A murmur spread through the audience. Adrian stepped forward, calm but resolute. Trust is earned through evidence. The sequences are transparent, and the methodology is documented. You may replicate it, challenge it, or refute it if errors exist. But until you do, dismissal is merely convenience masquerading as rigor. At that moment, a young mathematician from the audience, Arjun Singh, raised his hand. Mr. Calder, what about ethical implications? If your sequences are correct, they could revolutionize algorithms, encryption, and even AI prediction models. How do you intend to manage potential misuse? Adrian considered the question carefully. Ethics is inseparable from discovery. Knowledge by itself is neutral. Its application defines morality. I intend to publish openly with caveats and guidelines, inviting the community to collectively monitor implications. Accountability must be communal, not isolated. The discussion quickly shifted to logistics, verification labs, peer review, and data replication. Adrian outlined the precise steps he had taken: algorithmic tests, sequence validation across multiple computing platforms, and error-checking procedures that accounted for every possible computational limitation. Journalists scribbled notes, while mathematicians debated the nuances of procedural infinity versus traditional deductive proof. Outside, social media amplified every statement, every gesture. #InfinitePi, #AdrianCalder, #DurlingDebate trended globally. Analysts speculated about potential patents, applications, and even the philosophical ramifications of redefining the approach to infinity. Academic forums lit up with threads dissecting minute details of Adrian's sequences, while online polls questioned whether a student could truly outperform established authorities. Despite the chaos, Adrian remained focused. He understood that his decade-long obsession was no longer personal. It had become a public test of intellect, patience, and moral responsibility. Every interaction mattered. Every explanation could sway perception. The auditorium, once merely a stage for presentation, had become a crucible of accountability, exposing both human ego and the delicate balance between tradition and innovation. As night fell, the discussions continued into small groups and breakout sessions. Adrian worked quietly, reviewing sequences, cross-referencing calculations, and preparing for the inevitable global replication attempts. The confrontation with Durling, once a moment of personal vindication, had morphed into a larger battle. The integrity of knowledge itself was now under scrutiny, and Adrian realized that the true challenge was not proving the sequences, but guiding the world to understand their meaning responsibly. By midnight, the auditorium was nearly empty, but the echoes of debate lingered. Adrian paused at the doorway, looking at the night sky. 10 years of solitude, sacrifice, and relentless focus had brought him here. The real journey was only beginning, beyond personal triumph, beyond ridicule, into the uncharted territory of influence, responsibility, and the stewardship of knowledge that could reshape the world. Adrian's morning began with an urgent message from the International Mathematics Advisory Council, a formal request for a live demonstration of his sequences, scheduled in less than 24 hours, with representatives from top-tier universities, government agencies, and private research firms. The weight of the impending scrutiny pressed down on him. 10 years of meticulous calculations, sleepless nights, and obsessive detail were now condensed into a single event that could define his career or ruin it. He entered the lab, where Morrow had already set up multiple computational platforms, each replicating his sequences under independent parameters. They're ready, Adrian. But the council isn't just testing accuracy. They're assessing whether these sequences are robust under stress conditions, edge cases, and even potential computational sabotage. Adrian nodded. Then let's push them to the limit. If they hold under maximum scrutiny, that's our answer. The truth isn't negotiable. Just as he began fine-tuning the simulations, a secure notification appeared on his laptop. A delegation from Derling's University had requested immediate access to his work. The message carried a subtle undertone, curiosity mixed with territorial assertion. Adrian hesitated, then authorized limited access, knowing that transparency was essential, but carefully monitoring the depth of exposure. Within minutes, experts began testing the sequences, inputting random variables, introducing artificial computational noise, and attempting to force contradictions. Adrian watched silently, allowing the process to unfold. Every error caught, every anomaly explained, strengthened his confidence. Yet he sensed the tension building, not just in the room, but across institutions that had suddenly realized the implications of a student's solitary breakthrough. A sudden alert interrupted the process. A computational anomaly flagged in one of the sequences, highlighted by an AI verification tool from a rival university. Derling, who had been observing remotely, seized on the anomaly almost immediately. Mr. Calder, there's a discrepancy here. Are these sequences truly universal, or have you overlooked a limitation? Adrian stepped forward, unflinching. The anomaly arises from an input that exceeds the operational constraints of standard computational hardware. The sequences themselves are mathematically consistent. I can demonstrate this analytically without reliance on limited platforms. Morrow nodded, projecting his calculations onto the main display. Within moments, the room fell silent as the anomaly was resolved mathematically. Derling's expression darkened. The initial accusation crumbled under the weight of verifiable logic. Yet the tension in the room remained. Curiosity had shifted to concern. Institutions understood that Adrian's sequences could redefine computational paradigms, rendering traditional assumptions obsolete. The council's representatives began asking increasingly complex questions. Could these sequences optimize cryptographic algorithms? Could they enhance predictive models in AI systems? Could they accelerate scientific simulations previously constrained by computational limits? Adrian responded with precision, offering explanations that balanced technical rigor with practical foresight. His voice carried authority, tempered by clarity, and each answer dismantled skepticism. Outside, social media amplified every nuance. Analysts dissected each phrase, comparing Adrian's methodology to historical breakthroughs, while Derling's supporters debated whether a student could rightfully challenge the hierarchy of academic authority. The narrative had transformed. It was no longer about a proof. It was about the legitimacy of intellect, the power of unconventional thought, and the fragile boundaries of academic respect. Amidst the scrutiny, a private message appeared from an unexpected source, a senior mathematician who had remained anonymous until now. The note was concise, almost cryptic. Your work is beyond replication by conventional minds. Be cautious. Institutions will test not just your sequences, but your resolve. Trust no one blindly. Adrian felt a chill. The warning was clear. The battle was no longer intellectual. It was strategic, political, and deeply personal. Hours later, the live demonstration began. Cameras, observers, and independent verification units watched as Adrian methodically ran each sequence, predicting outcomes with precision that no established protocol had anticipated. For a moment, the auditorium seemed suspended in awe. Calculations that had consumed a decade were now distilled into moments, exposing patterns that had eluded even the most seasoned mathematicians. After the demonstration, questions shifted from doubt to application. How can these sequences be scaled? Asked a representative from a global tech firm. What are the implications for AI, cryptography, or even climate modeling? Adrian answered carefully, mindful that practical implementation was as significant as theoretical proof. His sequences were tools, but wielded incorrectly, they could disrupt existing systems. The responsibility weighed heavily, yet he remained composed, precise, and unwavering. As the session concluded, Derling approached privately, his demeanor measured but tense. Mr. Calder, you've exceeded expectations. But remember, recognition can be fleeting. The same institutions that celebrate breakthroughs today may question them tomorrow. Politics, not mathematics, may define your legacy. Adrian absorbed the words without reaction. He understood now that intellect alone would not protect him. Strategy, foresight, and resilience were as essential as computation. The sequences were validated. The challenge had been met. Yet the world's gaze, hungry for disruption, had only just begun. The morning air in the lab was heavy with tension, as if the room itself anticipated conflict. Adrian arrived to find several of his systems behaving erratically. Morrow's console displayed rapid fluctuations in sequences that had previously been stable. Adrian's heart sank. Someone had interfered. Not a mistake, not a hardware glitch, this was deliberate. Every pattern he had verified, every calculation painstakingly cross-checked over the past decade, was now threatened by human interference. He immediately initiated containment protocols, isolating the affected modules. Morrow traced every access log. Someone bypassed the firewall and introduced anomalies in real time. Morrow's fingers danced across the keyboard, eyes scanning streams of data. It's sophisticated. Someone knows your methodology intimately. The anomalies are not random. They mirror your proof's vulnerabilities. Adrian clenched his jaw. The sabotage was precise, almost surgical, designed to discredit him. But he refused to panic. 10 years of obsession had instilled not just knowledge, but instinct. He began analyzing the corrupted sequences, spotting the subtle manipulations that would fool anyone who relied on standard verification tools. The intruder's signature was clear: experience and authority, likely from within the same institutions that had once doubted him. Meanwhile, outside the lab, whispers of scandal began circulating. Anonymous posts suggested that Adrian's sequences might be flawed, even fraudulent. Academic rivals, long skeptical of a student achieving what professors deemed impossible, saw an opportunity. Durling, despite his outward professionalism, could not hide the faint satisfaction in his eyes during a conference call, his carefully measured tone masking the undercurrent of triumph. "We must consider the integrity of the sequences," he said, "especially in light of these irregularities. Peer review demands it." Adrian ignored the distractions, focusing instead on the corrupted data. Hours passed as he reconstructed the sequences from first principles, detecting and reversing every malicious alteration. Each correction reinforced the elegance of his proof, and the deliberate interference only highlighted the sophistication of his approach. The saboteur had underestimated the depth of Adrian's understanding. Then came the moral quandary. Evidence from the intrusions suggested that someone within his own institution, someone he had once trusted, was complicit. Adrian faced a choice: expose the saboteur publicly and risk a wider scandal, potentially undermining his own credibility, or resolve the sequences quietly, ensuring the integrity of his work while navigating the treacherous landscape of institutional politics. He weighed the consequences. Reputation could be weaponized, trust a liability, yet compromise was unacceptable. He decided on a measured strategy. Adrian would not publicly accuse anyone until he had documented irrefutable proof. In the meantime, he accelerated the recalibration of his sequences, creating independent verification frameworks that would withstand any scrutiny, internal or external. Morrow assisted, setting up redundant systems that cross-validated results in real time, ensuring that no manipulation could alter the integrity of the outputs. Late in the evening, the intruder's presence became even more audacious. Attempts to access Adrian's private notes triggered alarms across multiple security layers. Adrian intercepted a live feed of the intrusion attempt. Sophisticated AI tools had been deployed to mimic his own analytical methods. This was no longer just academic rivalry. It was a direct confrontation, a test of intellect against intellect, will against will. As Adrian worked, a sudden thought struck him. The sequences themselves could be weaponized, not physically but computationally. The patterns he had uncovered had implications far beyond theory. They could accelerate machine learning models, disrupt encryption systems, even simulate outcomes of global logistical networks. The responsibility weighed heavily. If he failed, or if the sequences fell into the wrong hands, the consequences could be catastrophic. He reached for a secure, offline terminal, isolating his most sensitive calculations. There, alone and undistracted, Adrian reconstructed the core proof from memory, confirming its universality and robustness. Every step was verified against every known computational framework. The intrusions could no longer touch it. The sequences were now incorruptible, a fortress of pure logic. By midnight, the crisis was contained. The anomalies were neutralized, and the proof stood unchallenged. Yet the battle had revealed a chilling truth. Intellect alone could not shield a discovery from manipulation or ethical compromise. Adrian realized that protecting his work required as much vigilance and strategic foresight as the 10 years spent proving it. Finally, a message arrived on his private channel, a single line, unsigned but unmistakable in tone. Brilliance threatens more than it enlightens. Guard it wisely. Adrian stared at the screen, understanding that this confrontation was not over. Institutions, rivals, and even allies could pose dangers. The sequences were safe for now, but the world outside was already preparing to test the boundaries of his discovery. In that quiet, tense hour, Adrian made a decision. The proof would be shared, but on his terms. Transparency would not come at the cost of vulnerability. He would navigate this treacherous academic landscape carefully, balancing revelation with defense, intellect with strategy. The final stage was approaching, the moment when the world would witness the full implications of 10 years' devotion. And Adrian knew he was ready. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Colleagues, students, and members of the academic board had gathered, unaware of the storm that had been brewing for months. Adrian stood behind the podium, calm yet resolute, his mind tracing every step that had brought him to this moment. The sequences that had consumed 10 years of his life were now complete, irrefutable, and ready to be revealed. He glanced at the first slide on the screen, the infinite series of numbers cascading in precise order. The room fell silent, the air thick with expectation. Professor Durling was among the front row, his posture rigid, eyes narrowing as he prepared to issue the first challenge. He had spent the morning rehearsing the skeptical questions, intending to embarrass Adrian in front of the institution that had once endorsed him, now poised to validate his rivalry. But Adrian's confidence was unshakable. Every manipulation, every attempt at sabotage had only strengthened his proof. He was ready. Adrian began without preamble. What you see here is not conjecture. These sequences are complete, verified, and reproducible. Pi is infinite in a way we have never quantified before, yet its structure is not chaotic. It is a complex order, accessible through the methods I will demonstrate. His voice carried across the hall, steady and authoritative. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The magnitude of what he was presenting was immediately evident. He walked the audience through the first layers of the proof, step by meticulous step. Every formula, every computational model was explained with clarity, leaving no room for doubt. Durling interjected, attempting to challenge Adrian with a question about convergence rates, but Adrian anticipated the point, responding with a counter that revealed not just the depth of his understanding, but the elegance of the logic. The auditorium remained rapt, eyes fixed on the screen, minds struggling to follow the clarity that emerged from chaos. Then came the climax. Adrian revealed the sequences he had reconstructed after the sabotage, the perfect models, resilient to interference, tested across multiple independent frameworks. The audience could see, almost physically, the integrity of the work. Whispers turned to gasps as the implications became clear. A student, dismissed and ridiculed, had not only solved what professors deemed impossible, but had done so in a way that surpassed traditional comprehension. Durling's face hardened, his usual composure faltering under the weight of undeniable proof. He attempted one final interruption, questioning the legitimacy of Adrian's isolated calculations. Adrian met his gaze evenly. "Professor, every variable has been cross-verified, every sequence is reproducible, and every anomaly, intentional or accidental, has been accounted for. The proof does not rely on authority, it relies on truth." The words landed like a hammer. Silence fell once more. The board convened for a brief consultation, the tension in the room almost unbearable. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous. Adrian's work was valid, unprecedented, and groundbreaking. Applause erupted, some hesitant, some fervent, but all acknowledging the genius that had gone unrecognized for too long. Durling, constrained by protocol, had no choice but to step back, his skepticism rendered obsolete by evidence. As the applause subsided, Adrian spoke again, this time to the students who had doubted him, to the faculty who had questioned him, and to the world that had almost ignored him. Persistence, rigor, and integrity are the only pathways to understanding. 10 years of pursuit, 10 years of failure and correction, have led us here. Let this not be a triumph for one individual, but a testament to the potential within all of us when we refuse to abandon inquiry. A student in the audience, the very one who had first dismissed the infinitude of pi, raised a hand. How did you even begin to approach it? Adrian smiled, recalling the countless sleepless nights, the equations sprawled across walls and notebooks. Curiosity, he said simply, and the refusal to accept boundaries imposed by others. Outside the auditorium, the world waited for the announcement to ripple through academic journals and scientific networks. News outlets, once skeptical, now clamored for interviews. The sequences Adrian had unveiled promised more than theoretical insight. They hinted at computational advances, encryption models, and a deeper understanding of numerical infinity. The implications were staggering. In the quiet that followed the storm, Adrian returned to his private lab. Moro's console blinked softly, now free from intrusion, now a faithful witness to human ingenuity. He allowed himself a moment to reflect. The ridicule, the sabotage, the ethical compromises, and the institutional pressures had all been trials by fire. What emerged was not only the proof of pi's infinite structure but the affirmation that intellect and integrity, when combined, were indomitable. Adrian leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of years settle. The fight had been exhausting, the battle against doubt relentless, yet the outcome was undeniable. A student who had been underestimated, ridiculed, and challenged had triumphed, not through defiance alone, but through relentless dedication to truth. And in that truth, the infinite beauty of pi was no longer an abstraction but a victory, carved painstakingly across a decade of unwavering effort. The world now knew. Pi was infinite, Adrian had solved it, and no ridicule, no sabotage, no authority could undo the clarity of his discovery.